Here is John Amis with Music Now, which this week visits Kent Opera.
Good evening. That was a prom audience in the Albert Hall in 1975 acclaiming the final duet from The Coronation of Poppaea, Sarah Walker and Anne Pashley as the terrible pair singing the ravishing music Monteverde gave them. It was a performance by Kent Opera, the subject of our programme tonight. I remember going to see one of Kent Opera's Poppaeas about that time and being absolutely knocked sideways by the music first and foremost, which is always a good sign, also very impressed by the simplicity, vitality and passion of the performance. The two persons most responsible were Roger Norrington, musical director, conductor of the company, then as now, and the production by Norman Platt, their artistic director and founder, and for many years their manager. Talking to one of those singers in that Monteverde duet, Anne Pashley, I asked her, supposing some awful catastrophe took place and Kent Opera were wiped out, what would you say about Kent Opera? What did it stand for? What did it do?
I think it would be an enormous loss. I mean, for one thing, it caters for the South, which no other touring company has ever done, I don't think. Possibly the old Wells used to tour the South. But, I mean, they're drawing marvellous audiences now from all over Kent and all the south of England. People who possibly haven't seen opera before at all. I mean, it would be a disaster. Apart from the fact that all the small companies are disappearing anyway, and people aren't touring so much, it's becoming more and more expensive to take the big companies out on tour. And here they are fulfilling a great need, taking out mostly chamber pieces to willing audiences.
Large chambers.
Couldn't be better. Large chamber pieces,
yes. But what do you think distinguishes Kent from some of the other smaller companies, some of which you worked with?
Well, all the sort of basic professional things, really, they've got now. I mean, when they first started, it was a bit haphazard. Now they've got professional wardrobe, marvellous orchestra, marvellous band, which is, you know, the whole sort of basis. Good scenery people, so that it looks good and it sounds good, and they cast very well. And I think that's all you need in an opera company, really, a good direction. You know, they're a very good small company, very good.
So now we know that Kent Opera is a small professional company working mainly in the south of England, and we know something of its quality. It brings together consistently carefully chosen, mostly youngish singers and orchestral players, mostly British, with occasional help from the West Indies and Australia. But here's Norman Platt, artistic director, to tell how and why it started.
I felt very strongly that there should be opera companies which belonged to the area, that the whole thing wasn't fed from one centre, so that the provinces were then called got the droppings from the rich man's table, as it were, in a slightly necessarily distorted form. But there should be opera which was geared to a particular area and to the theatres within that area, and that the people in the area could identify with. This is not to say that the singers and musicians should come from there. Singers and musicians should come with the best you can possibly get from anywhere at all, which in England means mostly from London.
And how did you start then? You started on a shoestring?
Very much on a shoestring. I had the idea for years, but I put it down as a memorandum in about 1964 and sent to the Arts Council, and I learned from that one shouldn't write memoranda and send them anywhere at all because nobody takes any notice of them. And after discussing it with various people and putting the idea around the country, various centres, the group of people in Kent said, we'd like this here. And it dawned on me the only way to get this idea across was to do it, not to talk about it. Right. And so we got a group of people who did subscribe, but they bought a pig in a poke, they didn't know what they were getting. They put up some money. The Arts Council gave us a small amount of money, and with that we put on our first production in 1969 of Popea in Tunbridge Wells and Canterbury.
Because you are a man of Kent and Tunbridge Wells?
I'm not a man of Kent, I'm a man of Lancashire. It was simply Kent because people in Kent said they would have it before anybody else said they would have it. It could have been Birmingham Opera or anything, but it just happened to be Kent because that was where I got the support.
And you produced it?
I produced Popea, yes. We did in the Leopard version first time. And
who conducted?
Roger. From very early on, I said the first thing you had to get was a very good musical director. And I worked with Roger as a singer before he'd done hardly any opera at all. And I was very struck by the fact that he was an enormous potential opera conductor.
Kent Opera is now busy on one of its two main annual bursts of activity. At the end of September, 2 performances of Tchaikovsky's Eugene Onegin in Tunbridge Wells, a new production made by Jonathan Miller, whom we shall hear from presently. I started work on this programme by going to a rehearsal of their next new production by Norman Platt, Gluck's Iphigenia in Tauris. And we shall hear a few snatches of that during the programme, by courtesy of the company. Then I had 3 very pleasant days last week at Eastbourne in all that stormy weather, watching the waves bashing over the front and going to the opera in the evenings at the Congress Theatre. I saw the brand new Iphigenia and the month-old Onegin, and a very musically mature Così fan tutte, which has been in the repertory for more than one season. I talked to Roger Norrington about the performances. What I enjoyed about performances, especially Onegin and the Gluck, was this feeling of discovery, of freshness. For example, when those strings start going like that in Tatiana's music, one's heart was caught.
Good. That's wonderful.
I mean, this is partly you, partly production, partly Jill Gomez, who's
Absolutely.
wonderful Tatiana,
It's
I thought.
beautiful, yes.
But he really does capture one's heartstrings, and that really is what it's all about.
I think so. We just try and get back to that kind of basic thing. And I think we have a tremendous advantage in a way as a small company, and again a part-time company, in that we don't have to do Onegin again later in the year as a German house would do without any rehearsal, or to bring it back next year or the year after or the year after that. I mean, how long do these pieces stay in the repertoire? And because they have to, because so much money has been spent on them, that they simply have to be there, and people want to see Figaro every 2 or 3 years in a big house. Mm. But with us, we just go quietly through the repertory. We put a piece right through our tours, you see. We tour in the spring one area and in the autumn another, so we bring it in the spring, carry it through into the autumn, and then we rest it for 3 years, and we bring it back. We just brought the Così back after 3 years. And then when we've put it through the system again, we scrap it. We don't give ourselves any opportunity of bringing it back yet again as it gets tireder and tireder and less fresh. So everything is new. We actually burn it or sell it when we've done it twice. And if we want to do Così yet again, then we've got to rethink the whole thing from scratch. So that we try and keep that freshness. It's a sort of festival opera freshness which we aim at, but in a touring capacity. And we don't regard touring as a dirty word. You see, I mean they're the towns in which we work. It's not sort of slumming. That's where we like to be. I love doing performances in these places.
But don't you ever feel you really want to bring the pieces into London?
We'd like to, because it would be very good to reflect what we're doing in the capital, being such a centralised country, London being so much the centre. And from the performances we have brought into town, there's such a lot of interest that we would like to let people see even some of the better known pieces. I mean, I think it'd be interesting for people to see Così without a pit, in a small theatre, like the Old Vic, for instance, where we might well like to work. Because we do it in such a different sort of way and in such a chambery way compared to the big houses.
Apart from the current Così fan tutte and Eugen Onegin, Jonathan Miller has also produced Rigoletto and Monteverdi's Orfeo for the company. I asked him why he liked to work with Kent.
Well, I think if I was going to be honest about it, I would have to say that my first encounter with Kent was the first company that asked me to do any opera. I wasn't asked by a big house to do it. How it would have been if I'd had my first experience with a big house, it's very hard to say. But having had the experience through luck and good fortune to go to a small company, I discovered that was really the ideal form of working. I really loved it. Everything is very intimate and very friendly. It's not top-heavy. The administration isn't vast. And everyone who's involved in the administration is deeply involved in the actual production on the stage as well. And you feel that all the money and energy and time is being invested in what is seen by the audience rather than anything that goes on behind closed doors upstairs.
Now, the business of doing things very simply, is that mainly necessity, or is that the way you would prefer to produce opera anyway?
Well, it started as necessity. When Kent Opera first composed itself, as it were, I think that simplicity came from necessity. But it happened to coincide, in my case, with a growing belief in simplicity as an art rather than as a necessity. And I get rather annoyed when I find critics saying, well, this is something which has been, very specially adapted for touring under circumstances of low budget. I would never choose to do an opera unless, in fact, the low budget happened to coincide with a vision that I had of the opera at that time.
Here's Roger Norrington again.
We interfere and fight, and we have, I actually think that's how, I think in opera there really are two stage directors in a sense, because the music must direct the operations, and a director on his own really can't decide all those things about timing. He's got to work as a team, two cart horses pulling the same cart in the right direction. And so there's got to be this kind of friction all the time. You simply can't say, one of them can't say, you're going to do it my way. It has to be both. And in that sense, as a conductor, one's very much involved in the production. And the producers who can stand that sort of thing are the people that I like to work with.
Yes, but I mean, one knows so many conductors who don't even bother to look up.
Well, yeah, but they're not serious opera conductors.
Some of them are in very serious jobs.
Well, yes, perhaps they are. But they're really orchestral conductors who are conducting nice music. I mean, if you're conducting an opera, you're conducting a whole way of life, as it were, on the stage, of which the orchestra is part of it. In a Mozart, of course, it's marvellous example, which is another reason why we don't use a pit, because there's only 6 characters in Così fan tutte, but there's another 24 characters in the pit, particularly all those wind. I mean, there's 12 wind people, and they're all saying things. Not so true in Verdi, where there's a good deal of papa and power. But there's 16, if you like, 16 voices more voices, because there's the 4 strings and there's 12 wind, and they're all saying things, and you mustn't miss them. The second bassoon is very important, that kind of thing.
Exactly, one didn't miss them. I mean, for example, there are 1 or 2 bits where the violas are very prominent.
Oh, wonderful, yeah.
And they come out wonderfully without the pit. Yeah. Trumpets in Come Scoglio, which one scarcely notices elsewhere. 100 points.
They're all there, and of course the challenge with Mozart, conducting Mozart, is to get all those points out and not drown the singers. It's very, very difficult, but it's tremendous fun to try.
Keep spontaneity.
And keep that spontaneity going. It's absolutely terrific. And of course the orchestra adore playing that score. I mean, they're just bubbling with excitement about it. And if they can see the stage and they know they're being taken seriously, they'll go on doing so. If you bury them in a pit, you've got problems.
One of the things Kent Opera has done is to discover new talent. They gave the title role in Rigoletto a couple of years ago to a quite unknown Australian singer called Jonathan Summers. Tremendous success. Summers was snapped up by Glyndebourne for their touring company's Falstaff to play the title role. Covent Garden gave him an extensive contract, and he can be seen as the herald in the current Lohengrin that Haitink is directing there. Here's Jonathan Summers at rehearsal as Orestes in the Gluck Iphigenia, and in a moment he'll tell us how he got going in this country.
Gods who provoked my crimes, gods who planned my dictation, sword to the flames and proclaim my damnation. On the torment I met, remove my master's light. On the torment I met, remove my master's light. Will remove my master's light.
I sang for Norman Platt and Roger Norrington, the Kent Opera, because they were looking for a Rigoletto.
Had you heard of Kent Opera?
No, I hadn't. Not until somebody said that they were looking for a Rigoletto. So I went and sang for them, and they were interested, and they asked me back to sing for them again, and then they asked me if I'd like to do it, and I said I would. And then the problems began. There was a bit of a wrangle going on between the Australian Actors Equity and British Actors Equity at the time, and my union in Australia were making it very difficult for British people to work there, so the compliment was returned here. So I found it very difficult to work. And had it not been for the sheer persistence of Norman over a period of about perhaps 3 or 4 months, I possibly still wouldn't be working in this country today.
Really?
Mm.
So you owe them double in a way.
Absolutely, yes. No, they really gave me my start.
Did the acting come easy to you?
Yes, well, I'd done a little bit of student acting, and I'd always felt sort of that way inclined, and it was no great problem to me. I enjoyed it, and particularly working with Jonathan Miller on this one, it was a great experience for me, and I learned a lot.
Mm.
It was
Can you
marvellous.
remember first rehearsals, sort of things that happened? Were you frightened at the first rehearsals, or?
Yes, I think I was. Yeah, a few butterflies, because I'd never really sort of worked in that situation before. I'd worked in student productions. I worked with the National Theatre in Melbourne, which was purely a student operation, and we used to do scenes from operas, something like the Guildhall, that kind of thing. So, and I hadn't really ever worked in this kind of professional way.
Now, can you think back to the first rehearsal? Can you think what happened at the first rehearsal? Or?
I remember Jonathan Miller did a lot of talking. It was most entertaining. I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying that.
I'm told by some of the cast of Kent Opera that you like, when possible, to come and you sit in the front row and you put your feet on the rails and you laugh like a drain at all your own producers' jokes.
Yes, I usually tend to like the bits of business I've invented. They usually make me laugh at the time when I'm inventing them, and if I've been so pleased with them that I've kept them in for the production, they usually continue to make me laugh when I see them again the second time. I mean, I hope it doesn't sound too vain or narcissistic, but I think on the whole the good gags are good gags, whoever invents them.
But they say your presence in the audience makes it sort of feel like a nice family outing.
Well, that's one of the nice things about the Kent Opera, is that it is a very intimate organisation. We all know and like one another. There's no sense of, as it were, being employed by a gigantic department store. There isn't that sort of Marshall and Snellgrove feeling that you have when you work for some of the bigger companies. And I think that we all like to see each other at work, and I certainly like to see them at work, not just simply to see my own gags working.
And I'm told that you all interfere and argue and pull and...
Yes, well, I think ideally production is not the imposition of a tyranny from a director, although this is one of the popular fictions about directors, but a discussion group which is simply chaired by a director who finally calls the meeting to order and makes a decision about the offers that have been made by everyone.
But of course, when you work for a big house, it isn't like that, is it? It all becomes more departmentalised and...
I think it's much harder. I think that you tend to get the outlines of an official art appearing as soon as something reaches a certain size. The risks of the big house are much greater, and therefore you're called upon to be much more decorous in your preparation and also perhaps in your behaviour in rehearsal. Although I find it very hard to adapt my behaviour in rehearsal to the circumstances. I mean, I always go on being like the way I am.
I did Pamina on the tour last year, and I also sang my very first Gilbert and Sullivan.
Did you know?
Which was Ruddigore, which was wonderful. I think one of the most enjoyable things I've ever done.
Really?
Yeah. I'm not honestly a Gilbert and Sullivan fan, but to actually perform in it, it's something quite different, which I had never done anything like that before. I did spend an awful lot of time laughing, even in the performances.
But tremendously good experience
Very
to cover
good
that side of it.
Yes. I wish that we could do more of that, actually, in all the companies. Lighter things, because they're very, very useful.
That was the voice of Aiswan Hari, the soprano, a really excellent piece of casting as the heroine in Iphigenia. She holds the stage and she sings with great nobility and powerful dramatic truth. This is her singing voice, at rehearsal, don't forget, after which she'll tell us how she set about portraying Iphigenia and how the preparation of an opera for Kent proceeds.
Well, I try to learn the words, first of all, especially something like this.
You mean
piece.
before you learn the notes?
Yes. That takes more time than learning the music. Then I go on to the music, and when I think it's in my voice, then we usually begin the music rehearsals. I didn't actually go to a coach before I began with Roger.
You bash away at home with the piano?
Yes, I do, yes.
But then when you start getting involved with Kent Opera, what's the first thing that happens?
Well, we have quite a lot of music rehearsals.
How long ago would they start?
They started about 2 weeks before the production rehearsals.
So the production period is how long?
Well, this one was nearly 3.5, 4 weeks.
3.5 to 4 weeks. That means 5.5 to 6 weeks.
Yes.
When you started coaching. Now, do you do this with Roger Norrington, or do you do this with their coach?
Well, we do it mainly with Roger. He somehow appears at all the rehearsals. I don't quite know how he does it.
Now, that's fairly unusual, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes. I would say that most conductors appear halfway through a production rehearsal rather than from the very beginning.
But Roger doesn't actually play, does he?
No, he doesn't.
So you work with your coach. Who's your coach then?
Well, in Kent Opera, Jonathan Hinden and Stephen Barlow.
Who was playing the piano then at the rehearsal I went to the other
Stephen
day?
Barlow was playing that one.
It was very good. I mean, it seemed to have so
Yes.
much of the Gluck style, which is
Yes.
totally difficult on the piano.
Absolutely.
So, nearly 6 weeks, and then stage rehearsals nearly 4 weeks before the rehearsal. And then, where do you do these? Do you do these just in a room and sort of block it out?
Yes, we rehearsed Iphigenia in the Abbey Community Centre in Victoria, and we were very lucky to have the actual set from the very first production rehearsal, which is very unusual, I think, for most opera companies.
That is of course lucky that the sets for Kent Opera are very simple,
Yes.
so that they can easily be transported.
Yes, yes.
And Norman Platt, of course, would appear, I suppose, for the first rehearsal.
Oh yes, he actually comes to the music rehearsals that we have with Roger, which is also very helpful because, you know, we can talk about the character and, well, the whole opera from the very first rehearsal.
Now, this is unusual.
Yes, I would say it is.
I mean, would you say this is always an advantage, and would you say that you wished other opera companies could do it?
Yes, I would. For me, in any case, it's very nice to have a producer and a conductor who think along the same lines.
That was Aithwen Harry, who plays the title role in Gluck's Iphigenia in Tauris. David Cairns wrote a very enthusiastic notice about the production and performance in last week's Sunday Times. Here's part of what he said. If the spirit is wrong, the work, Iphigenia, seems so much dead neoclassicism, an oracle forever mute. If it is right, it can speak with unimagined eloquence. In Kent Opera's production, in a translation by Michael Irwin, the spirit, the letter too, is to a remarkable and heartening extent right. This is one more notable achievement for a company that so often defies low budgets to produce intelligent and vital results. He goes on to say, the overriding impression is of conviction. Norman Platt's production, Roger Butlin's designs, and Nick Chelton's lighting show how classical costumes, gestures, and rituals, simply but imaginatively handled, can be made both dignified and telling. And in Roger Norrington's vital, sympathetic hands, the score is from first to last meaningful and moves with a sense of single purpose and coherent dramatic shape. David Cairns. The performance of Eugen Onegin also drew enthusiastic notices. In the Daily Telegraph, Alan Blythe liked it, including the performances of Jill Gomez as Tatiana and Peter Knapp as Onegin, and also Jonathan Miller's production.
Do you go to rehearsals when you're producing a new opera, say this Onegin, which is the most recent one, with an exact idea of what you want to do?
No, I've never approached any work on the stage with an exact idea of what I want to do. And I think many singers are often very surprised by the latitude which I give them. Again, one tends to get, and I particularly am often accused of being someone who imposes terrible conditions upon singers, but actually anyone who actually came to my rehearsals would know that I give far greater latitude than almost any producer. I have a series of general themes which I think are the topic of the work. I will discuss that with the singers, and then I will get them to rehearse in the mode of the themes which I have discussed, often letting them work it out in themselves.
You mean even just words without the music?
Just words without the music sometimes, but usually just say, I'll discuss what I think the opera is emphasizing, what its main outlines are. And then perhaps in a certain scene I will say, well, what I do not want to see is this, this, and this. Now try and work it out, eliminating those unwanted items. For example, when Jill Gomez and I were working together on the letter scene in Onegin, all that I said to her was, first, I do not want to see a tornado of writing going on. This is not
Scribble.
This is not what I call the Basildon Bond scene. It is a scene about a girl deciding what to write. It's not the scene of the writing of a letter. It's the scene of the hesitant composition of one. Therefore, I said, well, what we will do is to delay the writing until there is a long, unsung musical episode or torrent at the end. And there is a wonderful moment when the music pours in a torrent, when the writing obviously pours in a torrent. And I said, well, that was one thing. Let's not write throughout the work, and let us also not rush from window to bed in a series of romantic agonizings. Be hesitant and quiet, and move as little as you possibly can. And that was all I said to her.
And the music does the rest.
And the music does the rest. And I said, well, you have to sing it. I don't sing it. Your body, your voice is going to be moved and animated by the music that you have to sing. Given the things which I don't want to see, given the things which I feel the scene is about, do everything that you want to within that framework. And then perhaps I would add one or two things, like hand movement I wanted to see when she first lay down on the bed. When a child tries to go to sleep, it traces the patterns on the cracked plaster of the wall. And I said, when you call out to Nana, I can't sleep, just do that for a moment. And then one thing I said at the very end, when you've finished writing, do what so often happens when one has one of these awful white nights when one can't sleep and everything is agonized, and then suddenly you come to a decision. I said, don't go to the window and pull it wide open. Do what so often happens when you have a night writing your essay for your tutor. You fall asleep and then get woken by the dawn, rather than watch the dawn. And within that framework and those two ideas, she then invented the scene, and I watched her, and every now and then made comments where I felt that she had perhaps not emphasized enough, but it was her scene. And I like singers and actors to invent the scene from their own imagination within the framework which has been provided by mine, so that it is a collaboration of frame provided by the producer, picture provided by the performer.
And now for Peter Knapp, the baritone who plays Onegin. Peter Knapp, it's spelt with a K, is doing very well at the moment. He sung Don Giovanni at Glyndebourne and the Colosseum, and he recently won the Benson and Hedges Gold Award for concert singers. £2,000, bottle of champagne and lots of dates, including a recital at the Wigmore Hall, which he's going to give on December the 5th, Schubert, Britten, Ravel. Peter Knapp is interested in more than singing. He's interested in teaching, experimenting with new ways of staging opera, and he likes the way Kent does things.
I think there's room for another company doing the same thing in a different part of the country, I'd have thought. Ideal situations for young singers to perform in small theatres, smallish orchestra, sympathetic conductor who keeps the orchestra down. And I think they've now got a very wide audience, popular following. And I think they are doing operas in a slightly different way. I think they're doing them in perhaps a slightly more naturalistic way, trying to get away from the old style of presenting opera. And not hiding too much behind sets and costumes. I mean, the singers are being laid bare.
But, I mean, wouldn't you say that's the way opera ought to go?
I think that it is the way opera ought to go. I think one can no longer afford to spend vast amounts of money on sets and costumes.
What about audiences for Kent Opera? Do you find going to these towns where they don't often have opera, perhaps never have opera, what's their response of the audiences like?
They're tremendous, I think. They're very warm and enthusiastic. And many of the theatres, actually, are ideal. I mean, Southsea is a wonderful little theatre. I mean, it's not the most wonderful place, but it's a wonderful theatre. And Bath is a wonderful theatre, where you get as near as you ever do to direct contact with the audience, almost fingertip contact with the audience. I mean, the galleries come right round to the side of the stage, and so you do have this tremendous direct contact, which is very exciting.
You never feel that getting too near the audience is a disadvantage?
No, I don't think so. You don't sing so loud for their own comfort.
No, only some actors I know and opera singers would find that a disadvantage, I'm sure.
Would they? What,
yes,
they find it distracting?
Sort of embarrassing, distracting.
Oh, I like that. I'd like to sort of sit next to them, I think, in some instances.
Tell me about the designs and staging part of Kent Opera. They're nearly always the same people, aren't they? Or are they?
Yes. Well, the two Miller productions I've been in have both used Bernard Colshaw, who has used simple, straightforward ideas, which has suited what we've been doing perfectly. Onegin has 3 gauzes, basically, beigey-coloured gauzes, and rather ethnic-looking furniture. And it means that the tension is focused by that sort of stark simplicity onto the characters and onto the relationships between the characters. More like one would say getting television than
Close-ups.
Yes, a sort of close-up feeling. Although you're obviously not getting the close-up, but there is that feeling that you're switching from one small area to another. Of course, there's nothing to distract your eye line from that.
When we started, the priorities were singers and orchestra, and the stage side has now come in as an equal partner. I think it was right to start that way, but we were weaker on that side. Now there are no concessions whatsoever, and if we don't do our work unless we're sure we can do it well, and we use the best scene painters, the best prop makers that we can get anywhere in the country, everything is top quality. The idea of a concession for touring is entirely foreign to the whole concept. The whole idea is that you give people outside London the quality they would expect to find in the metropolis.
Do you have any idea what the production costs of Iphigenia are?
Iphigenia, well, this is a very tricky area because you make any statistics you like really out of this. Our production costs include orchestral rehearsals, which with a fixed house you don't have because they're part of they're on the establishment, and also the hiring of halls for rehearsal, hiring of theatre to rehearsal.
Yes, exactly.
So it's very, very difficult. So if you say production, what it costs in the way of sets and costumes, as opposed to anything else, I think the Iphigenia was 10 to 11,000. It's not cheap. It's just it seems to me that's a reasonable amount to verify. If you're going to get the quality workmanship, and
you've got to have a set that you can trundle around, haven't you?
It's got to fit a lot of different stages, and you've got to think of this first. You can't make a set and then adapt it because this is an insult to the theatres you're going to. You've got to be clever. Your designer's got to be very clever, and I think he has been in this case because this is a set which will not lose by being in smaller prosceniums and openings than we have here.
And then you may get asked to go to a festival where you don't know the stage, and it might be quite contrary.
Well, then we've got to consider whether we can do that or not, because we wouldn't compromise the standard for that reason.
What festivals have you been to? Have you been abroad?
We've been abroad. We went abroad for the first time in '74. Went to Portugal. We went to a lovely theatre in Lisbon, and we went to Oporto. And in fact, this was sort of what broke through that year, because the fact that we had been abroad seemed to make an awful lot of difference to a lot of people. We weren't any different, but they thought if you've gone all that way and come back, you must be rather good, you know, so that's somebody who should spend that money to go that way. And it was a great experience.
But it's not geography, it's just honour as well.
It's the honour, yes.
Kent Opera seems very much on its feet. I mean, for example, the Sunday papers today, you know, it seems that you definitely arrive. Are there more things you want to do with Kent Opera?
Oh yes, there are a lot of pieces. There are a lot of pieces, there are a lot of sort of improvements in the way in which we work. There's always things you can do. We've been on a fairly limited budget up to now, and although it's as it were satisfactory at the moment, there are always more things one can do. There are a lot of works. There's more Mozarts that we haven't done. We have Seraglio next year, Idomeneo the year after, and Mozart is always the kind of the key of our work because it's the size that is easiest for us. There are some more Verdis. There's Falstaff we want to do. We want to do Fidelio, and lots of other pieces. And then there's just welding this company feeling, continuing to weld this together. We've got a marvellous chorus this year, for instance, much the best we've ever had. Very bright and intelligent and good musicians, and I want to encourage them to do lots of things and to be the covers for the main parts and so on, and to keep building up the orchestral style of the company, which I think is now getting very much more individual than most opera orchestras are.
What is so lovely about Kent is that in moments, in Così, in Fiordeligi's second aria, when the horns play, when you feel that some phantom presence has come to sympathise with her, whereas there are moments in the Dorabella's first aria when you feel that the woodwinds are laughing at her claims, and if they're buried in the pit, if you simply use the orchestra as an acoustic central heating system which simply blows gusts of vague 18th century scented Mozart through a grill, I think it distorts it all. Whereas in fact what you have is a three-part drama where the attentive silence of the audience the meticulous activity of the orchestra and the dramatic performance of the singers forms one complete entity. Whereas if you drop any one of those three out of the arena, you've actually lost one essential part of the drama. And the felt attentiveness of the audience is part of it. I mean, I would really quite like to see what happened if we had played the Mozart with the lights on.
Final words from Norman Platt, Roger Norrington and Jonathan Miller in our feature about Kent Opera. And by now, I hope you're saying to yourself, where can I see this company at work? Where can I catch this Iphigenia, Così fan tutte or Eugene Onegin? Well, now let's see. Today's Friday. They've just finished Iphigenia in Weymouth. And tomorrow is the last night there, Onegin. Next week, Theatre Royal, Bath, starting on Tuesday. The week after, beginning November 29, Kent will be in Southsea, in that lovely King's Theatre Peter Knapp was talking about. In December, Horsham, Canterbury and Snake Maltings. Then in the spring of '78, they start again. Canterbury, Tunbridge Wells, Cambridge, Nottingham and Poole.